The empire of stars stretched across countless galaxies, a dominion so vast that many worlds never even heard of one another. Its rulers, however, knew every inch of their empire, and with that knowledge came an arrogance that blinded them to anything outside their realm of control. They saw themselves as gods, untouchable, unrivaled. Every race, every civilization they encountered had fallen to their might. They absorbed cultures, planets, and species as easily as one might pluck fruit from a tree. Humanity, to them, was nothing more than a curious distraction. A small, primitive species tucked away in a remote corner of the galaxy, barely worth acknowledging. Earth's technology was laughable, their military forces pathetic in comparison to the Empire's armadas. The Empire had seen countless worlds like Earth before, and they all crumbled in days. What threat could this small, insignificant race possibly pose to the most powerful force in the universe? The Emperor himself had joked about it in the Grand Council. "We may as well leave Earth to the scavengers," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. The room erupted in laughter. The idea that such a weak, divided species could ever present a challenge was absurd. Conquering Earth was seen not as a military necessity, but more of an afterthought, a formality to expand their dominion. It wasn't even worth the effort to send the full fleet. A small portion of their forces would be more than enough to overwhelm the planet. Earth's leaders, meanwhile, knew what was coming. The warnings had been there for years: distant signals, intercepted transmissions, and the sudden disappearance of nearby civilizations. While Earth was technologically behind the Empire of Stars, humanity had one thing the Empire lacked: the will to survive, born from a history of constant struggle. Humanity had always been at war, if not with itself, then with nature, disease, or time. They had learned to endure, adapt, and fight back when the odds seemed impossible. What the Empire of Stars didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that humanity had been preparing for this day in secret. For decades, hidden from the public and even from most governments, Earth's brightest minds had been working on a project designed for this very moment. They knew that Earth couldn't compete with the Empire in terms of numbers, ships, or firepower. But they didn't need to. Humanity had a secret weapon. Deep in the underground labs of a forgotten military base, something extraordinary had been created. Something designed to be the perfect weapon, a soldier beyond anything the Empire had ever seen or faced. They called him the Blood Knight. He wasn't just a man, he was a product of centuries of genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancements, and cutting-edge nanotechnology. Every cell in his body had been altered, strengthened, and sharpened for one purpose: to protect Earth at all costs. He wasn't just faster or stronger than any human, or alien, for that matter. His combat instincts had been honed to perfection. He could heal from wounds in seconds, his body regenerating almost instantly from even the most grievous injuries. His armor, a blend of nanomaterials and advanced alloys, could adapt and shift to counter any weapon the Empire's forces might throw at him. The Blood Knight was more than just a soldier, he was a one-man army. The people of Earth didn't know about him. They couldn't. He was humanity's last line of defense, a myth whispered among the few who had been part of the project. But as the Empire's ships approached, as their forces prepared to descend on the planet, those who knew waited in silence, knowing that the time had come for him to step out of the shadows. The Empire's arrogance blinded them to the possibility of resistance. They sent down a detachment of their elite soldiers, not as a precaution but almost as a joke. They expected Earth's military to crumble within hours, if not minutes. The soldiers of the Empire of Stars were the finest in the galaxy, unbeatable, they believed. They had never known defeat. To them, Earth was just another stepping stone on their path to complete galactic domination. And for a moment, it looked like they were right. Earth's defenses were overwhelmed within minutes. The Empire's soldiers tore through Earth's first lines of defense with ease. Ships were destroyed, cities bombed, and humanity's military response seemed insignificant in the face of the Empire's might. But then he arrived. The Blood Knight stood alone on the battlefield, watching the destruction unfold before him. His presence was unnoticed at first, just another figure amidst the chaos. But when he moved, When he struck, the battle shifted in an instant. The Empire's soldiers, who had never faced real resistance, found themselves being torn apart by a single warrior. His speed was beyond anything they could track, his strength unmatched by any force they had ever encountered. One by one, the Empire's elite fell, their superior numbers counting for nothing against the unstoppable force that was the Blood Knight. He moved through them like a storm, his weapons an extension of his body, his every movement a calculated strike. The Empire's laughter faded, replaced by confusion then fear. This wasn't just a battle, it was a slaughter. The Blood Knight's ruthlessness was terrifying. He fought without mercy, without hesitation, every move designed to inflict maximum damage in the shortest amount of time. For the first time in their history, the Empire's soldiers knew what it felt like to be outmatched. By the time the first wave had been wiped out, the Empire's leaders were no longer laughing. The Blood Knight wasn't just the result of a last-minute defense effort. His existence was the culmination of centuries of scientific research and human determination. Earth's top scientists, military strategists, and engineers had been working in secret for generations, preparing for a threat they knew would eventually come. They understood that humanity, with all its flaws and internal conflicts, would one day face an enemy so powerful that conventional means of defense would fail. That enemy was the Empire of Stars, and the Blood Knight was the answer. He was engineered from the very best that humanity had to offer. His genetic makeup had been enhanced with the DNA of history's greatest warriors, each strand meticulously selected to give him the physical and mental edge needed to survive in any combat situation. But the enhancements didn't stop at genetics. Advanced nanotechnology was embedded into his bloodstream, turning his body into a weaponized machine capable of feats no ordinary human could achieve. From the moment of his creation, the Blood Knight had been subjected to a grueling training regimen, designed to push his body and mind beyond the limits of human capability. He was trained in every known form of combat, from hand-to-hand fighting to advanced weapons systems used by the most elite military forces on Earth. His reflexes were sharpened to the point where he could react to an attack before it even fully registered. His senses were heightened, allowing him to detect even the slightest changes in his environment. There was no battlefield condition that could catch him off guard. His mind was another asset, equally as formidable as his physical abilities. The Blood Knight had been programmed with the knowledge of Earth's greatest tacticians. He could calculate and adapt in the heat of battle, predicting enemy movements and devising counter-strategies with terrifying efficiency. Where most soldiers relied on orders and commands, he acted autonomously, analyzing every situation as it unfolded and responding with the precision of a machine but the unpredictability of a human. But the most terrifying aspect of the Blood Knight wasn't his raw power or intellect, it was his resilience. His body, laced with nanotechnology, could heal from even the most catastrophic injuries. Bullet wounds, broken bones, and torn muscles all repaired themselves in a matter of moments. No matter how devastating the attack, the Blood Knight would rise again, ready to fight. This regenerative ability made him nearly invincible in battle, and the Empire had no idea what they were walking into. His armor was another masterpiece of human ingenuity. It was forged from a blend of Earth's strongest materials and advanced alloys, resistant to heat, impact, and even the energy-based weapons used by the Empire's forces. The armor wasn't just a defensive tool, it was a living part of him, linked directly to his neural network, capable of shifting and adapting in real time to match the battlefield conditions. If an enemy came with plasma-based weapons, the armor would reconfigure to absorb or deflect the energy. If faced with a physical assault, it would harden to withstand the blows. The Empire had never encountered anything like it. The Blood Knight had been created not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of humanity's indomitable will to survive. Earth, despite its internal conflicts and technological setbacks, had never given up hope. They knew that one day, an enemy far greater than anything they had ever faced would arrive, and they had prepared accordingly. The Blood Knight was their ace in the hole, their final hope. He was the embodiment of human resilience, a living testament to what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. But creating the Blood Knight came at a cost. His enhancements had isolated him from the rest of humanity, making him something other than human. While his body was a perfect machine for war, his mind had become something darker. Years of isolation, combat training, and genetic manipulation had stripped away parts of his humanity. He no longer felt fear, no longer questioned his purpose. He was a weapon, pure and simple, and his sole objective was to protect Earth, no matter the cost. The Blood Knight's existence had been kept a closely guarded secret for years. Only the highest levels of Earth's military command knew about him, and even they had been reluctant to unleash him. There was a fear that once unleashed, there would be no turning back. But now, with the Empire of Stars poised to destroy everything, there was no other choice. When the Empire's forces descended on Earth, they were met with the usual resistance they had come to expect from other planets: feudal, disorganized, and easily crushed. Earth's armies, despite their valiant efforts, were no match for the Empire's superior technology and firepower. It was only when the first wave of soldiers was dispatched, and the Blood Knight was deployed, that the tide began to turn. He moved through the battlefield like a phantom, striking with the force of a hurricane, but with the precision of a scalpel. The Empire's elite soldiers, bred and trained for war, were overwhelmed within moments. They had never seen anything like him. He was faster, stronger, and more lethal than any opponent they had ever faced. No matter how many times they attacked, no matter how many wounds they inflicted, the Blood Knight kept coming. Their advanced energy weapons, which had disintegrated entire battalions of Earth's forces in seconds, barely scratched him. Every time he was hit, his body regenerated before their eyes. He absorbed their most powerful attacks and kept moving, adapting to their tactics and countering them with terrifying efficiency. One by one, the Empire's finest fell, unable to comprehend the force they were up against. For the first time in their existence, the Empire of Stars felt fear. They had never encountered a species that could match their might, let alone surpass it. The Blood Knight was unlike anything they had ever imagined, and with every soldier he killed, the realization sank deeper: they had vastly underestimated humanity. What the Empire didn't understand was that the Blood Knight wasn't just a weapon. He was the culmination of everything humanity had learned from centuries of conflict and survival. He was the embodiment of Earth's determination, a force that couldn't be measured by technology or numbers. The Empire had thought of humanity as weak, but the Blood Knight was proof that they were far from it. And as the Blood Knight stood atop the battlefield, surrounded by the shattered remains of the Empire's forces, it became clear: Earth wasn't going to fall so easily. The Empire's forces had never been pushed back before. For the first time, their carefully constructed facade of invincibility began to crumble. Reports flooded in from the battlefield: shattered platoons, broken lines, and a single enemy warrior who cut through their elite like they were nothing more than prey. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Earth was meant to be an effortless victory, a reminder to the galaxy of the Empire's strength. Instead, it was turning into a nightmare. The Blood Knight's presence changed everything. His ability to withstand attack after attack, his unmatched speed, and his devastating efficiency in combat left the Empire's soldiers shaken. In all their conquests, they had never faced anything like him. He moved with precision, dispatching entire squads in seconds, leaving no room for counterattacks. His strikes were swift and lethal, each blow meticulously calculated to cause maximum destruction with minimal effort. The Empire's generals watched in disbelief as their forces were decimated. What they initially believed to be a malfunction in their intelligence reports quickly became undeniable truth. Their most advanced units were falling faster than they could be replaced. Their soldiers, conditioned to believe in the Empire's superiority, began to break. Fear was spreading. And with fear came chaos. The Blood Knight's very existence threw their strategies into disarray. Every tactic, every formation the Empire had relied on for millennia proved ineffective against him. He was unpredictable, a ghost on the battlefield, vanishing from sight only to reappear where he was least expected. He fought with the savagery of a wild animal, yet with the tactical brilliance of a seasoned general. At first, the Empire sent more troops, thinking that overwhelming numbers would do the job. But the more they sent, the more they lost. For every soldier who tried to engage the Blood Knight, 10 more fell. And for the first time in its long and storied history, the Empire of Stars began to experience defeat. The battlefield became a graveyard of the Empire's hubris. Their once mighty soldiers, who had never known fear, now hesitated to advance. Their ships, once symbols of their dominance, were reduced to smoldering wreckage. The Blood Knight was relentless, a force of nature, unstoppable and seemingly invulnerable. He pushed forward, never retreating, never pausing, cutting down everything in his path. The Blood Knight didn't care about their fear. He didn't care about their confusion, or the panic spreading through their ranks. His purpose was singular: defend Earth. Every step he took was calculated, every enemy a target to be eliminated. He fought with an intensity that bordered on mechanical. His movements were precise, his attacks devastating, and his resolve unbreakable. And it wasn't just his strength or speed that terrified the Empire's forces, it was the way he fought. The Blood Knight seemed to anticipate their every move, adapting to their tactics before they could even implement them. He was a living embodiment of combat, his body and mind working in perfect unison to outmaneuver, outfight, and outlast every opponent. The Empire's finest soldiers had been bred for war, trained from birth to be the ultimate warriors. Yet against the Blood Knight, they were helpless. No matter how many times they reformed their lines, no matter how many different weapons they used, the result was always the same. The Blood Knight would cut through them like they were nothing, leaving only carnage in his wake. As the battle dragged on, the Empire began to realize just how dire their situation had become. This was no longer a simple invasion, it was a fight for survival. They were no longer the hunters, they had become the hunted. And the Blood Knight showed no mercy. The Empire's generals, desperate to turn the tide, called in reinforcements from distant sectors, mobilizing the full might of their military machine. But it was too late. The Blood Knight had already done the impossible. He had broken the spirit of the Empire's soldiers. They no longer saw themselves as invincible. They no longer believed in their inevitable victory. The battlefields that had once been theirs now belonged to the Blood Knight. Every step he took was a reminder of their failure, every fallen soldier a testament to his unstoppable power. His presence alone sent waves of fear through their ranks. It wasn't just that he was stronger, faster, or more skilled than anything they had faced, it was that he couldn't be defeated. No matter how hard they tried, no matter how many soldiers they threw at him, the Blood Knight remained standing, cutting them down one by one. The Empire's soldiers, once proud and fearless, now found themselves running from a single warrior. Their tactics, their training, their technology, it all meant nothing in the face of the Blood Knight's relentless assault. The battlefield had become a slaughterhouse, and they were the prey. For the first time, the Empire had to face the reality of their arrogance. They had underestimated humanity. They had laughed at Earth, thinking it was an easy target. But now, they were being taught a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The Blood Knight was no mere soldier. He was a weapon, a living embodiment of everything the Empire had failed to recognize in humanity. As the bodies of their fallen comrades piled up, the Empire's forces began to lose hope. It wasn't just the physical toll of the battle, it was the psychological impact of facing an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat. Every time they thought they had him cornered, the Blood Knight would find a way to strike back. Every time they thought they had finally gained the upper hand, he would remind them that the fight was far from over. In the end, the Empire's laughter had turned to silence. Their mocking arrogance had been replaced with terror. The Blood Knight had shattered their illusions of dominance, and in doing so, he had shown them the truth, that humanity, for all its perceived weaknesses, was capable of extraordinary things when pushed to the edge. And as the battle raged on, the Empire could no longer deny the reality before them. The Blood Knight was more than just a soldier, he was a force of nature, a living weapon designed to bring them to their knees. The galaxy had never seen anything like him before, and it was unlikely they ever would again. The Empire, once so sure of their victory, now stood on the brink of collapse. Their finest soldiers lay broken on the battlefield, their greatest weapons rendered useless. And as the Blood Knight continued his assault, The Empire was forced to confront a terrifying truth: they had underestimated the very thing they had sought to destroy. The battle wasn't over yet, but the outcome was already clear. The Empire of Stars had laughed at humanity, but now, with each passing moment, they realized the cost of their arrogance. The Empire of Stars, having witnessed the devastation their forces faced at the hands of the Blood Knight, realized that conventional methods would no longer suffice. Their tactics, honed over centuries of conquest, had failed against a single human warrior. Now, with the Empire's forces in disarray and morale at an all-time low, they had no choice but to summon their greatest weapon, the Emperor himself. The Emperor of Stars was no mere figurehead. He was a being of immense power, one that had lived for eons and seen civilizations rise and fall at his command. His body was enhanced with ancient technology that no living species fully understood, granting him abilities far beyond those of his elite soldiers. He had not personally taken part in a battle in centuries. Such was the extent of his dominance that no conflict had required his presence. But now, faced with the unexpected resistance from Earth and the seemingly invincible Blood Knight, the Emperor knew he had to step in. The Emperor descended from his command ship, and as he arrived on the battlefield, the air itself seemed to tremble. His presence sent ripples through the ranks of his soldiers, reinvigorating them. They believed that with their Emperor leading them, no force could stand against them. For all their recent setbacks, they clung to the hope that he would restore order and crush this human anomaly. The Blood Knight, standing alone amidst the wreckage of the previous battles, watched as the Emperor approached. He didn't hesitate. This was the moment he had been created for, the ultimate test. While the Empire's soldiers had proven strong, the Blood Knight knew they were not the true threat. This being, this Emperor, was the real enemy. He represented the might of the Empire, the pinnacle of their strength and arrogance. As the Emperor advanced, his steps deliberate and measured, it was clear that he wasn't like the soldiers that had fallen before. His every movement exuded power, and his gaze was cold and calculating. The Emperor radiated a calm certainty, a confidence that came from knowing he had never been bested. He had crushed rebellions, overthrown civilizations, and now he stood ready to do the same to Earth. Without a word, the two engaged. The battle between the Blood Knight and the Emperor was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Every clash of their weapons sent shockwaves through the air, and the ground beneath them cracked from the force of their strikes. The Blood Knight, with all his enhancements and lethal precision, found himself facing an opponent who could match him blow for blow. The Emperor's strength was overwhelming, his movements impossibly fast for a being of his size. His command of energy and matter was beyond anything Earth's scientists had ever conceived. But the Blood Knight had never known fear. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He met each of the Emperor's attacks head-on, his instincts sharpened by years of training and enhancements. For every strike the Emperor landed, the Blood Knight countered with one of his own. The battlefield became a blur of motion, a symphony of destruction as the two forces clashed. Despite the Emperor's overwhelming power, the Blood Knight fought with a raw intensity that the Emperor had never encountered before. He was relentless, a machine of war designed to never stop, never tire. The Emperor, though formidable, had grown accustomed to winning through sheer dominance. But this was different. The Blood Knight fought with a purpose that transcended survival. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Earth, for humanity's right to exist. As the battle dragged on, the Emperor began to realize that this human warrior wasn't just a soldier. He was something more, something the Empire had never anticipated. The Emperor's attacks, which had shattered armies and obliterated worlds, weren't enough to break the Blood Knight. Each time the Emperor thought he had gained the upper hand, the Blood Knight adapted, finding new ways to counter his immense power. The Blood Knight's regenerative abilities allowed him to heal from wounds that would have killed any other being, and his combat instincts, honed through decades of training, made him a deadly opponent even in the face of superior strength. But it wasn't just physical prowess that kept him in the fight, it was his will. The Blood Knight's resolve was unshakable. He fought with a determination that the Emperor had never seen before, a refusal to give in even when the odds seemed insurmountable. For the first time in eons, the Emperor felt something unfamiliar: doubt. He had never lost a battle, never faced an opponent that could withstand his power. But here, on a distant, backwater planet that he had once considered insignificant, he found himself in a struggle that he wasn't certain he could win. The Blood Knight was more than just a warrior. He was the embodiment of humanity's tenacity, their refusal to be subjugated. The Emperor unleashed his full power, channeling ancient energies that had torn apart entire star systems. The ground beneath them fractured, the sky darkened as waves of energy surged from his body. He intended to end the fight with one final, overwhelming blow. But the Blood Knight, battered and bloodied, didn't retreat. Instead, he charged forward, using every ounce of strength he had left. The final moments of the battle were a blur of violence and destruction. The Emperor, confident in his victory, aimed to crush the Blood Knight with a single, decisive strike. But in his overconfidence, he underestimated the human's resolve. The Blood Knight, anticipating the Emperor's final move, countered with a blow so precise, so devastating, that it bypassed the Emperor's defenses entirely. The Emperor staggered, disbelief flickering in his eyes for the first time. The Blood Knight, relentless and unwavering, pressed the advantage. With one final, brutal strike, he brought the Emperor of Stars to his knees. The once invincible ruler, who had never known defeat, fell in a broken heap. The battlefield fell silent. The Empire's forces, watching in horror, realized what had just happened. Their Emperor, the embodiment of their power and dominance, had been defeated. The Blood Knight stood tall, victorious but not triumphant. This wasn't a celebration, this was survival. He had done what he was created to do: protect Earth at all costs. The remnants of the Empire's forces retreated, their spirit shattered along with their leader. The Blood Knight, now alone on the battlefield, watched as they fled. The Empire of Stars, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, had been humbled by a single warrior from a planet they had deemed unworthy of their attention. The Blood Knight had won, but the cost had been immense. The battlefield around him was littered with the remains of both Earth's defenders and the Empire's invaders. And yet, in that moment, humanity stood victorious. They had faced the greatest power in the galaxy and survived. The Empire's laughter had been silenced forever.